Welcome, everyone, to the ACTR Teachers Lounge. We're going to try something that we haven't done before, and it's brainstorming a solution to classroom curricular challenges. And as we do that, we're actually going to be using a protocol that's called the Critical Friends Group Model. And what this is a reflective collaborative learning process where there's a certain protocol to use. And to hear a problem, a curricular or a classroom problem that an instructor is facing, and then to have a group of people try to provide solutions. When this is done normally, it's done in a learning community of a group of people, of 5 to 8 people who meet together maybe once a month. And that group always stays together. And sometimes it's a cross disciplinary group. So you might have a history person and a language person. And so you tend to get a variety of different responses. And there's usually a very, very strong sense of trust because this group stays together and works on it permanently. So we're going to be adjusting the protocol slightly, because we're in a different situation. So the first thing that we do, there's a facilitator, and the person, normally people don't present their issues anonymously. They come forward to the group and they present a problem, and they present it using these 4 queries. And so Susan Cresson is our first person posing a dilemma, and hers has to do with assessment and testing for neurodiverse students. And so this, usually we ask people to spend no more than 5 minutes. It doesn't need to be 5 minutes at all, but no more than 5 minutes describing their problem, the dilemma that they're dealing with. Susan?
All right, thank you very much. The issue that I'm concerned about is assessment for students with neurodiversity and also with heightened anxieties, given the state of the world in general. And this applies, I guess, in all contexts of assessment and trying to assess both formatively and also as a way of establishing what the standards are. So that's the issue in the context. There are 2 areas where I've tried that I focus on: written and oral assessment. I'll start with written very briefly. I personally don't like giving tests and quizzes, and I especially don't like giving them back when they're not good. But students have told me that they do actually appreciate regular quizzes. So focusing on the idea, the general idea that many people do of many small stakes assessments, quizzes, rather than high stakes on the core items. And I tell the students specific points of grammar or vocabulary that will be on these quizzes. They're 5 to 10 minute quizzes on the absolutely core elements that I expect everybody to master. And I put this on the calendar for the course. And then there's a similar section on the test, especially if it's been difficult on a quiz, so that it helps them with their focus review, because sometimes the students who have issues of focus and of time management, students increasingly want to know exactly what's on the test. So this is the part that they feel that they can control. Then there are aspects of the test, just in terms of the visual and organizational aspects of the test, formatting, not trying to be ecological and save space on a test, but have 1 section per page to help them with focus. Having visual reinforcements, trying to have the same types of visual reinforcements that they've had in the PowerPoints and homework and exercises. So they have the visual trigger for those who are visually oriented. That seems to help them. The visual triggers also helps reduce stress sometimes, having that reinforcement. So these are some things in written assessments. The other part is the oral assessments, which I started during COVID, doing individually, meeting with each student. And this year I experimented with a get to know meeting. I meet with each student 20 to 30 minutes. And the first, this time I did it as not graded in week 1. So they got an idea of what to expect when they come in what it would potentially be a stressful situation. And then that's repeated in weeks 4, 7, and 10. And that enables me to do a lot of differentiation, which is another one of the topics. And students know that I will ask them on the questions that they've covered already in class, but also individuate it for them, because I do have 20 to 30 minutes with each of them. And they prepare for that with these Raskazhityev CBA recordings, 3 each quarter. They can't come to the oral assessment until they've done the recording, until they've gotten feedback on that. And then I incorporate the topics that they choose to talk about on the general topics of the chapter in these recordings. I build on those in the oral test. So using individuation as a way to reduce stress and to focus on people's strengths. And then when I meet with them, I type out everything they say in shorthand, and then I go back and write it all out. And then they can use that for their next recording. So it's a whole cycle where they feel like they're building, and it's individuating, and it's focusing on formative rather than grading and assessing and telling them what they did wrong. It's more a matter of telling them this is all a process that builds on itself. So that's in a nutshell some things I've come up with. But I would love to hear other ideas, and in particularly other ideas that are less time consuming, because I don't think it's realistic to meet with every student 4 times a quarter for half an hour in most settings. And in general, this type of differentiation tends to be extremely time consuming, as I'm sure everybody knows.
Thank you, Susan. That was great. So now what we're going to do is we're going to spend no more than 3 minutes, and we're just going to ask clarifying questions of Susan. Is there anything that you need more information about to think about, or that you didn't fully understand? And so normally when this is done in a group of 5 to 8 people, well, not everyone has clarifying question for sure. Maria.
My question is, what is the main issue that's been happening? Like what, because from your description, it seems like it's a very well thought out system, but what is the issue that has happened, I guess, with the students?
It's the general issue of something that I'm always trying to navigate, of how do I help students who have various aspects of for example, focus issues or time management issues or anxiety. That's the broader issue of how to keep high standards without making it too anxiety inducing, and while accommodating different learning styles. That's a broader issue. I wonder if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Because when I do these small, the easiest thing would be to do would be to have the quizzes and have the test directly based on them. That would be minimal stress, but that's too restrictive, right? I can't cover in 5 to 10 minute quizzes everything that's going to be on the test. So the balance between number one, the scope of the material, and also the flexibility for students. So students have enough flexibility to express what they want to express and not just parrot back.
So I'm going to
There's kind of a give and take in all of this.
So I'm unclear, Susan. At first I had written down your question as like what other ideas that exist that are more realistic, because this level of differentiation is so time consuming. And then you proposed, so I'm unclear if the question is how you keep high standards while accommodating, which I don't think, we didn't hear the difficulties that you have with high standards and the accommodation process. So I don't, the first question is, which one of those questions do you want us to address? And then if you want us to address the how you keep high standards while accommodating, could you speak a little more to that?
I think what I was hoping for, and I'm not sure I understood how all this works. I think what I was hoping for is if other people have suggestions on how they do assessments for students with either neurodiversity or anxiety issues. So kind of tips that other people might, practical tips, additional things I could do to expand my toolbox.
Okay. Could you repeat that? Tips for neurodiverse to reduce anxiety?
Tips for students with neurodiversity and tips for students with anxiety. Those are two different categories that sometimes overlap. To expand my toolbox.
Okay.
Yes, expand my horizons.
Okay. Does anyone else have any other clarifying questions? Julia?
I have a question about what levels of students we're talking about. Are they beginners or the intermediate level?
These are intermediate level students.
Okay, thank you.
So having them talk for 20 to 30 minutes isn't traumatic.
Okay.
I think that's actually part of it. When they sometimes at the end I say, do you realize we just talked for 30 minutes? And you can just see the sense of pride that they can do it, right? So that would be another aspect of this, Lee. How do we make assessment formative and positive for all students, including those students who need more scaffolding for focus, for anxiety, etc.
Okay. John?
Hi, everyone. Can I make some suggestions now, or are we not there
We're
yet?
not quite there. We're about
Okay,
to
I'll
get
wait.
there.
Sorry.
Before we jump to suggestions, I just want to allow no more than 3 minutes to give some warm feedback. And what warm feedback is just affirmations, things that you heard that you want to hold up as positive. Just so we all remember the things that Susan did say about addressing neurodiversity, addressing anxiety. So maybe we can in our brain bullet those points. Would anyone like to provide any warm feedback for Susan? Maria, Masha.
Susan, thank you for sharing the ways with which you've been approaching it. And I think it's heroic what you're doing, and I think it's a huge impact on your students. Because being at a large university, they actually seldom get one-on-one with faculty. So it's not only a learning process, it's going to be a huge impact on their undergraduate experience, even though it's a huge time investment on your side. Spoken from experience as well, just like doing this one-on-ones, you then hear I hope you do hear from your students as well, but it's a huge formative step, but it's also a huge emotional support for them as they navigate their undergraduate years.
Thank you. I think teachers in Russian in general tend to be pretty dedicated.
I also want to say, I think for intermediate students to have an experience where they realize that they've spoken to someone for 20 minutes, a half an hour is huge. Like so much is their confidence. And I really loved your emphasis on the process of learning because we're all doing some things well and focusing on what's the next step and not the end goal always. And I think that, probably also really helps with the anxiety. I also loved what you said about you're forcing the building blocks because they don't get to the conversation with you until they do the recording and they get feedback on the recording. And so I loved that natural scaffolding that you had put into it.
That's something that sometimes maybe as teachers we have difficulty. We try to accommodate, but I found if I don't insist on certain things like these building blocks, you can't come to the oral test until you've done the practice recording. Insisting on certain things can actually be a good source of support.
Okay. I think that we can move on. And so now we have what's called cold feedback. And so cold feedback is practical suggestions. So yes, John, this is your time. The practical suggestions or new approaches, if you could think of, a new approach or just a suggestion or a tweak. Sometimes there's a tweak. And so I guess the question, what's important now to know is to return to Susan's question. And what are tips for working with neurodiverse students or students with anxiety or just general students to reduce their anxiety and to expand that toolbox of strategies that we can use with both neurodiverse and or anxious students
In assessment.
in assessment? Okay, thank you.
Should I go or no?
You may go, yes.
Okay. Well, Susan, I mean, it definitely sounds like you're, trying to provide some really great alternative settings, to
Oh.
lower that anxiety, which is
Can
one.
I just pause you 1 second? I'm sorry, and we could do it this way, but just I want to tell you that normally for the protocol, Susan's actually not a part of this conversation.
Oh, okay.
Susan, we are talking amongst ourselves. It's a little bit bizarre, but Susan's supposed to be taking notes and then she's going to reflect back to us what she heard that impacts her.
Okay, so
Let's
I'll
try
just
to do it in
what
a
I do.
pure form. And this is something that we're totally not used to. But okay, moving on. I'm so sorry.
That's all right. So I'll just mention some things. So like number one, an alternative setting. So maybe not in, the class where the assessment is taking place with everyone else, because that definitely can cause anxiety for students, the need to perform, the time constraint and whatnot. Here in middle school, high school, we have, IEPs, we have 504 plans, and students have, extra time if need be. So I'm not sure if that's something that is, willing to be considered. Also clear expectations of what is going to be on the assessment, that definitely. So knowing exactly what's going to be expected of them, even though when producing language, either in written form or spoken form, we want them to create and whatnot. But, maybe giving them guiding questions beforehand. I have also in the past even just shown them, the assessment, just so that my students clearly know what's going to be expected of them. And that's pretty much all I can think of right now. Thank you.
Maria?
So the suggestion that I find really works for me personally is that not just providing accommodations, but considering changes in instruction and even curricular design in a way that would allow for really multiple versions and options for, and really open-ended questions in the tasks that we give. So personally, I'm working on incorporating more and more task-based language teaching approaches in my curricular design. And especially for assessment, it works really well. It's harder for there's a whole pre-task, post-task cycle, but it works really naturally for assessment when we give real life-based tasks that allow students to use their whole linguistic resources to deliver a final product. It allows usually for differentiation in the product as well, and that has worked. Like I currently in high school I teach French, but I've noticed that my neurodiverse students actually react really well to that. And personally, actually, students like autistic students are usually my best students, but they want differentiation on the other end of the scale. It's usually enrichment activities. So anyways, task-based language teaching, incorporating tasks in assessment and tasks based on real life are usually very motivating to students. They forget sort of that this professor-student interaction is happening. They imagine themselves outside of this context, and usually it's less, in my observation, it's less anxiety-inducing for students.
Thank you, Maria. Is there anyone else that wasn't sure? I'm keeping my eyes on the time. We have a couple more minutes. Sasha Shapiro.
I was just going to kind of second, or maybe at this point, third, the idea of letting students take tests somewhere else. And in my case, most of the tests are digitized, or at least there's the option of taking them digitally. And definitely in my intermediate and upper level courses, I do let students take them at home. I trust them enough, and I know that if they're struggling, they just don't need the pressure of doing it with everyone else at the same time. So I give them anytime during the same day, and I just stick it at home. And there is a time limit, which is usually much higher than the original time limit. But there is still a time limit so that they're not like, wandering away and doing something else in the meantime. And that seems to have worked.
Okay. So Susan, we're curious now to hear what you've taken away from this process. What's resonated with you in your particular situation, because you have a very particular assessment situation.
Yeah, thank you very much to everyone for your suggestions. I think this idea of the alternative settings is definitely something that we all need to consider, and alternative settings maybe also for returning assessments. That might be something to consider. The idea of clear expectations of what's on the assessment, that's something that as I mentioned, I move more towards but I find that difficult because it setting the minimum can become the maximum, if that makes sense. So that's something that I clear expectations with keeping in mind the full range of what I want students to be able to produce. The idea of showing the assessment before, I think is a really interesting idea. That's somewhat like doing a practice test with similar things. And I did something similar with that, where something very similar to a quiz was repeated on a test. But again, there's always this issue of if you show them what's on a test, then you have to do the same test, and that's could be somewhat restrictive. I definitely but thank you very much for bringing up all of these things that are relevant at all levels of teaching. In terms of what Maria said, I absolutely agree that we need to move away from item-based testing, and I guess I should have specified that I'm talking about the part of the overall assessment structures that have to do with item-based testing. But I definitely agree that as many as possible of our assessments should have real-life situations and using students' whole set of resources, not just the specific items, to deliver a final project or a product of some sort, with real-life motivating situations. And also the idea that I think was implied in what you said of universal design, where we are revising we're not just accommodating, we're trying to figure out how we need to change our instruction, how we need to change our curricular design, how we can get to the root of the problem and not just have band-aids. I think that's absolutely vital to some of the things that you were saying. In terms of digital testing, that's something that's really something I find difficult. There's Respondus is the standard, and I think we're supposed to look at the recordings of students who use Respondus, which is something that's not in my pedagogical framework. And I think it's absolutely phenomenal, Sasha, that you have that level of trust with your students. That's a really beautiful thing that you said about that. But I think maybe I've been talking too long.
You haven't really been talking too long. We're trying to crunch a protocol, and this is about how long it takes. And I was thinking we could do it faster, and indeed we can't really do it faster. So thank you, Susan, and thank you for being brave and putting forth your dilemma. The last, what I'm wondering, I'm looking at the time now, understanding that we want to take the last 15 minutes because ACTR is having a 50th anniversary and we are having an international virtual conference, and we want to introduce people to the topics that have been suggested for this conference, and not to say that one could not present outside of these topics, and to allow people to have some time, if they're interested, perhaps in organizing a 5-minute share out or a roundtable. So we really do want to do that at no later than 5:20, but between 5:15 and 5:20, really. So we have time for one more with an abbreviated format, maybe not having the response at the end, and simply addressing the issue and the warm and cold feedback. I'm wondering if there are only 13 of us, so we could do two things. We could go into a breakout room and have do two and but then we would only have 6 people maybe per room, one person presenting and 5 people thinking, or we could do one. And that would
Could we actually just do one, and I'll excuse myself from presenting since I'm traveling. I'm in the car. I think that works out well for me.
Okay, Corey, that's great. I'm sorry that I'll catch up with you on your situation. Okay.
Yeah, no, thank you. This was really, really beautiful, though.
Okay. So we ultimately did have 5. Now we have 4, so there's 3 more. Part of that is whether Olga or Susan, you want to facilitate a conversation, or whether you feel that it would be best to have all voices in this room.
Could we vote?
Let's vote. Would you like to be split up and go into a breakout room with half the people? Or would you like to stay together? Would you like to leave or go into a breakout room? Raise your hand. Three people. If you would like to stay here, okay, so that's 3. I guess that loses. I'm so not used to voting. Quakers don't vote. So I feel very uncomfortable with voting.
Californians do.
But maybe at this is something I think we could do again at some point. I guess I could say one thing. I mean, I'm just looking down. I do have one. It's actually at this point we only have 2. If we were, and one of them is a situation with teaching writing online, and the second one is an issue of differentiation in the classroom. That's in a middle school situation, differentiating for heritage and regular students in one classroom. So they're 2 very different topics. Does that change anyone's opinion on whether if we were to go into breakout rooms, we could do both of these? Raise your hand if you would like to go into breakout rooms. Okay, we're going to do this here. John, you were unfortunately the last person to get your scenario in, so you don't get to go today. I'm sorry. So Masha Gerbert is going to present her scenario that has to do with teaching writing online. And Masha, I have the 4 questions in the chat for you.
Okay, beautiful. Thank you so much. So this is an issue that came up with my fully virtual program. The program is, just to clarify, it's novice students of Russian. And we are meeting during the year. So there's a more intensive summer camp part, which is about 3 weeks. And then we continue during the school year. There's 10 weeks in the fall and 10 weeks in the spring. Twice a week, we meet for like hour and a half each class. It's completely ungraded, and the students are really, truly amazing. I love them. I love this program. usually the onus is always on speaking, because that's what, really we need them to take away at the end of the program. However, of course, we're working on all 4 major skills, right? And I've noticed that I've struggled the most getting students to write and to, I guess, put in as much effort in writing as they do in their speaking. So they're really brave. They want to create with language. They want to try new things. Writing, though, we use Google Classroom as the online platform. And they do answer the questions. I ask them questions related to the topic. But we don't really have that much time in class to devote to like independent writing. So their responses are really minimal. I know they can give more. And I've tried, leaving the writing part for homework, but of course, it's already an extracurricular program for them. So the response is still maybe like a half of my students will submit a response, and they're quite minimal still. So this has been my dilemma, how to, maybe somebody has tips and tricks and ideas on how to facilitate writing in a fully online virtual program.
Thank you, Maria.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. And so I'm going to open now for some clarifying questions from the group. Maria Hatimski.
Yes, sure, Mary, thank you for sharing information about your program. What types of writing assignments do your students do currently that you perhaps don't like or would like to improve on? Can you please give us an example of an assignment?
So an example would be, and I think that actually is an excellent question, because that might be part of the issue. Maybe the question itself doesn't allow for that much of extensive writing. I ask a question that relates to the topic, and novice level, it's mainly topics pertaining to self. So if we talk about school, I would ask them what is their favorite class in school and why. I usually give them a model of, my own response to that question using the vocabulary that they have. So I give an example of what the answer would be. And usually from the students, I get a bit less. So that would be, usually it's in a form of a question that I ask that is related to what we did in class. Sometimes I do give them a situation of like, we've talked about, they've interviewed their friends about their likes and dislikes, and now they write a letter to the person they think they are similar, похожи. Мы похожи на что мне нравится, что тебе нравится, things like that. So it's pretty basic questions, but that, yeah, those are it. Mm-hmm.
Are there any more clarifying questions? Okay, let's open for Emil. Yes.
Yeah. I have a question. How much? So we're talking about writing. How much reading do students do in that virtual class? Do they read much? Do they have to read outside class? Do they have to read inside class?
Yeah, that's another great question. Not that much reading. So I try to bring in authentic materials as much as possible. So if we talk about, food, they're reading, any kind of like, maybe a cafe menu from some region, or like a place. The theme of the program is, country studies in Russia in particular. So I try to bring in regions in Russia. But anyways, so usually beyond what is shared in class, and those are like minimal authentic materials, so to say, they don't do much reading, just because it's already like 7:30 to 9 p.m. class. If I just feel that if I assign a lot of homework on top of that, then I'll not have any students left.
I guess I have a question too. Do you, when you, because you were talking about the amount that they write, do you communicate to them that they should write a certain amount, or are they free to respond however they decide they should respond?
Mhm. I usually I do talk to them about trying to get to that paragraph length, you know, just a paragraph on a topic. I don't expect much beyond that. I think it's already like pretty miraculous what we can accomplish in 1 year fully online. So yeah.
Great. Okay, could we give just a few minutes of warm feedback? We don't want to skip that, but I do want to move forward. Masha.
Maria, I
Khatice.
really want to applaud you for taking the time and care to teach all those different skills online and to actually invest in their writing, especially because they're remote, especially because we know they're tempted to use the tools. So the fact that you're worried, concerned, and you're thinking to make it better speaks a lot to you as a teacher.
For me, it was really pleasant as a high school teacher to just hear you kind of sparkle with love for your online high school students. And so it's really nice for me to see these Star Talk connections and people at the college level getting to know high school students. Okay. So now what kind of cool feedback would we have for Maria, which again is about suggestions, practical suggestions or new approaches that she might take? And could you repeat your question, Maria, that you want to address?
So I'm just looking for suggestions to encourage students, to motivate students, or maybe some ideas of how do you facilitate writing in general in an online setting. And I think a lot of us have done that online setting if we were teaching during the pandemic. So a lot of us, I think, have that experience.
Olga Klimova.
Yeah, so I was wondering if this is a special level, not very advanced level, maybe they what can motivate them is to recreate like social media posts and SMS key, text messages, and for them to make it more natural. If they have, let's say, some kind of like you can maybe create a group in like WhatsApp or Viber, something like this, or Telegram, where they can have like weekly tasks, and you can even pair them up and give them a task. For example, Женя и Ваня на этой неделе должны узнать, у кого любимый какой фрукт or something like this, right? And depending, of course, on your topic. So there might be some kind of like task like at the end, but it might have some specific challenges. For example, you can give them it's more like a game. You can give them some limitations and say you cannot ask them directly, right? What is your favorite fruit? But you can do asking about the color, the smell, where it can use the, can you put it in the pie? Can you eat it without like cooking, something like this? So and just have some kind of creative Chinese like correspondence where it can be like as a like, а это ты любишь, а он желтого цвета? Нет, не желтого цвета. Можно приготовить торт? Нет, нельзя приготовить торт. So something like this, and then maybe it will be motivating in a way, and then at the end they need to report back what they found out, right? Or if there is like a secret or the end goal at the end.
Hey, Susan.
Just very quickly, building on actually Emil's question, which I thought was really interesting, asking about reading in connection with writing. The idea maybe that was implied with that was building the writing based on the reading, and also so that got me thinking about kind of recycling authentic materials, because you mentioned using authentic materials, and that could be maybe motivating for writing. So, for example, rather than say if you're having people make comparisons, base it on a cartoon or something like that. Are you more like Masha or are you more like Medved? Or who of the family members in Slugan Aroda would be a good roommate for a family member of yours? Kind of creating a task about it, creating a problem solving recycling something else that you've already done, and also using that also to feed vocabulary and structures. But I think I kind of stole Emil's idea, maybe. I'm not sure.
Thank you, Susan. I'm gonna give us until 17 after, which is exactly 5 minutes. So I'm gonna ask everyone to be crisp because I want to hear from everyone. John, you're next.
Okay, so yeah, Susan, I had the exact same idea. So also building off Emil, right? So just starting with that authentic text to teach structure, grammar, vocab, all that stuff, you know, and then moving on to the writing task. The other thing that I wanted to ask is, you know, if if you're teaching different aspects of writing. So like, for example, to get my students ready, and I'm sure Lee, you do the same thing, you know, for the NREC, or my students also do the Apple test, you know, teaching elaboration, how to elaborate in one's writing by adding more details, you know, adjectives, using conjunctions like you know, explanation, argumentation. So I would definitely recommend, because I think you did make the comment that, you know, the writing is a little sparse, it needs more detail. So just teaching them ways to build upon their writing, you know, and elaborate, add more details. So that would be my suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Emil?
So like I've always been told to be a good writer, you have to be a good reader. So that's why, like I mentioned, like reading, and I think reading could be such a powerful tool to teach writing. And one thing that I want to suggest, I know that there's a lot already going on, they have to do a lot of things, but usually when you offer them like extensive reading, they read what they want to read. And I think that can connect with Olga's comment about like social media. It doesn't have to be like Pushkin. It doesn't have to be like, I don't know, any like a book and like in Russian that's like really difficult to read. That could be something easier to digest, and they can maybe respond to that, and they can always talk about what they read, but they choose what they what they read, and they choose what they want to write about. Then I think maybe that could be a little bit more motivating. But I know there's already a lot going on in the fact that you want to emphasize writing when there's already so many things happening. I feel like it's very courageous. So yeah, just extensive reading. Maybe that could be helpful.
Thank you, Emil. And Natalia Petrova?
Yeah, I will be short. First, I would maybe, I agree with the other speakers. I would probably make the writing tasks more specific, and then maybe I would increase the level of students' responsibility, but in a kind way, maybe to push them to write their paragraph or like a few sentences about a certain topic, and then maybe extend this writing activity into a class speaking activity. So maybe students can share their written responses, and then maybe it would be possible to create, I don't know, a warm-up speaking activity or some discussion suitable for first-year students based on what students wrote at home. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, thank you everyone for sharing. It was very interesting.
Thank you, Natalia. I will say, having students who participate in a Star Talk program, and I'm sure Sabina can relate, one of the things that Maria commented about was that it's from 7 to 9 in the evening after they've had a full day of school, after they've gone to sports, and when they still have homework. So I will say one of the problems I think with Star Talk right now, I think it was an excellent idea to have these long programs, particularly for students who are not otherwise attached to a Russian program, because it expands the number of students who can have access to Russian. But for those who are in a regular school program, it's just too much. Like they don't, and it's difficult because now the commitment of what they need to do before the program and after the program is taking away from their desire to do the programs. So I think, that is just a good thing to remember. And Masha or Maria, I liked your also sense of balance and understanding. Because I think all of the strategies people have talked about of connecting the reading and the writing and making it so you have to do the reading to do the writing to do the speaking are all excellent pedagogical tools. And I think that Maria might find that her students are just actually lost if she tries to require that. And I'd be curious, Maria, if what you say, you know, if that would be accurate. But that's what I see with my own students who are doing Star Talk programs and who are feeling stressed actually at their ability to keep all the balls in the air with their sports, their music, their school, and then this other ungraded thing that they're doing. Okay, friends. I'm sorry, that's what we say at Friends School. Okay, friends. I'm going to have us, I think that this was very interesting to do in a different context than at my school. And we may return to this. I will, of course, talk with the PD committee and see their reactions. But we might return to this again. And if we do, John, we will certainly include your scenario. I'm putting in the chat right now a list of the topics for the 50th anniversary ACTR Virtual International Conference, which will be from April 25th and 26th. The call for proposals, which I hope you've seen, that has gone out to CLAG, CEASE announcements, as well as the ACTR mailing list and other places, gives all the information, and you can also find it on our website. What I've done in the form that I just put in the chat is simply list the different topics, suggested topics there in a broad sense. They're not, you know, the names of panels, but they're the general kind of streams of topics that we were thinking would be of interest to an international audience. One thing that has occurred to us is we are really wanting to focus on accessibility, and those who are less integrated in the professional community sometimes have ideas for things that they would like to present, but they don't really know how to get on a panel because they don't have the same contacts. And so what I was hoping we could do is have everyone just read through those topics. And if you're interested in either presenting on something related or just on something in general, that there would be room at the bottom for you to put the title of the thing that you would be interested in doing, and then to put your name down. I guess if I were to share my screen so that we could see this together. So the topics are at the top. Everyone can see my screen? And we have, so these are the topics at the top. And then we have a number of different formats, just like any conference. One can propose a fully formed panel of 3 papers, 20 minutes each. You could submit a proposal for an individual paper that we will put into a panel. Or we have some other formats. The roundtable is a typical format, and we're asking for pre-formed roundtables surrounding a topic. And then we have a new kind of format of a 5-minute share out. And those are really intended to be very succinct discussions, giving practical solutions, models, you know, maybe for example, what Susan presented on how she does these individual conversations, very much somewhat like a poster session at ACTR, but really a 5-minute share out. And you would collect a group of 4 or 5 people to do that for a 45-minute session where it would be 25 minutes of presentation, 20 minutes of conversation, or 8 to 10 people who would do that in a full 90-minute panel. You can see down here, we already have one pre-college teacher, Anna Surin from North Forsyth High School, who is interested in having a share out on using authentic resources in the novice level pre-college classroom. So she would be interested in other people who would like to show an authentic resource and, for example, the worksheet that you use with that authentic resource. That would be a 5-minute share out. So if anyone is interested in now, the idea of this was to make it more accessible. So for example, Anna Surin, if you were to be interested in this and you were to write your name and affiliation and email, she as the organizer would reach out to you and then continue to try to fill that 5-minute share out panel. So this was hopefully a way of getting some people involved who would be interested in organizing, or even just saying they would be interested in presenting, and then a member of the ACTR board or the organizing committee could follow up with thinking about who would be a good organizer for that. And so I just wanted to leave, we have 8 minutes. If I can give everyone a little while to simply peruse the topics here and to think if you would be interested in writing a topic and saying that you're interested in either organizing or participating. And of course, I'm happy to answer any questions, as you know, Olga Klimova as well, or any member of the Professional Development Committee, Irina Kogel, Susan Kressen, Maria Chatimsky, Sasha Shapiro. Any of us could answer any questions. We're all on the conference organizing committee.
Do we want to keep the recording on, or?
I think at this point we could stop the recording.